We are now recording. So again, good afternoon, and I will now introduce to you the league president, Mayor Janice Kovach of Clinton, who will then in turn introduce the DLGS Director Suarez. Mayor Kovach, are you on?
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Well, we can. I know you're remote, so it's a little, but go ahead.
All right. So we're going to try and do this quickly so that we can get to the meat of what's really important. First, to everyone that is on the call, IDA was definitely a struggle for many of us. If there's anything that we at the league can do for you or for your communities, please feel free to reach out. Mike and Lori are there and willing to offer, as well as any of us who are able to will help however we can. Thank you for joining us, and I would like to introduce Director Suarez, who joined DLGS in 2021, but is no newbie to government in any way, shape, or form. Prior to joining local government services, she was with the governor's office as associate counsel, and prior to that, she was in the DCA and was a liaison between DCA and the legislature. So I know that she's got quite a bit of information that she's going to share with us. And hopefully this will be a big help to all of you who need it. And again, whatever you need, please feel free to reach out. And Director Suarez, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. I know it's been a whirlwind. This year was my first year as the director, and I think I hit the trifecta plus between an election year, COVID, the ARP funds, and now we've got IDA. So fingers crossed we can continue to serve as a resource to everybody who's here. Mike, I just have one question for you. As far as the PowerPoint that we sent over goes, are you guys actually going to be uploading that, or do you want me to do that?
I can run it from here if you like. So I have it set up ready to go when you're ready to go.
Okay, I think we can get started. So that way, if there are questions, we can also try to get to those and have some sort of dialogue and discussion.
All right, bear with me one moment. There we go. That should be good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, so if we could just move on, I guess, to the second slide. Will you have to click through that, Mike? Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So just to kind of kick this off, there are several tools that are really available to the locals once the governor has declared a state of emergency, which he did for IDA. The first tool is emergency appropriations and procurement. So NJSA 40A:4-46 establishes the process for municipalities to make on-planned appropriations and expenditures for natural disasters and weather emergencies like IDA. Emergency expenses are those related to storm response, recovery, restoration of services that were not anticipated in the current year's budget. Each emergency appropriation resolution is required to be filed with me as the Director of Local Government Services, and any resolution that exceeds the 3% expenditure limit requires my approval. Under 40A:4-54, a municipality or county may adopt a resolution to use the special emergency funding provisions of Section 55 of the statute to cover extraordinary expenses for repairs and reconstruction of things like streets, roads, bridges, or other public property damaged by the flood or hurricane, where such expenses were unforeseen at the time of the budget adoption. The second tool is storm recovery reserves. So in 2014, the statute was expanded. So what had been considered snow removal reserves were now going to be storm recovery reserves. Municipalities did not need to have had a snow removal reserve to establish a storm recovery reserve. And municipalities may utilize funds in its storm recovery reserves for any purpose relating to storm recovery after current budget appropriations utilized for that purpose have been expended. So any reimbursement of these expenditures shall be deposited back into the reserve after the fact. Unexpended balances for storm recovery expenses may be lapsed into the reserve on an annual basis. So on the next slide, we have another tool, and this is emergency procurement. So in circumstances where an emergency affecting the public health, safety, or welfare requires the immediate delivery of goods or the performance of services, a contract can be awarded without public bidding, regardless of the bid threshold. So state law requires that an emergency contract shall only address the immediate needs of the emergency, rather than encompass everything having to do with that emergency. So I'll use the example that we used in the local finance notice. Tree debris removal from public rights of way and removal of hazards such as tree debris that's in danger of maybe falling on people or property can be procured on an emergency basis. But the emergency contract exception to public bidding cannot be utilized for other tree debris removal work that's not considered an urgent matter of public safety. So contracting units can enter into emergency contracts without first obtaining a vendor's or contractor's business registration certificate or the BRC. But the contracting unit can't make a payment until a copy of the BRC is provided to the contracting agency. So the contracting unit should pretty much just inform the vendor or contractor of the BRC requirement upon awarding the emergency contract to avoid any issues. Contractors awarded public works contracts under the emergency procedures must also be notified of applicable public works contract registration and prevailing wage requirements at the time of the award. The municipality must confirm compliance with these requirements prior to making payment for the completed work. So moving on to, I think, slide 4. For the immediate aftermath of Ida, DEP and Treasury issued some guidance on debris removal and cleanup. We issued that guidance via GovConnect for both of the departments, and we pulled some of the contacts and resources from that guidance for these slides for easy access. So hopefully that will actually prove useful. Onto slide 5. DEP also adopted several general permits by certification to facilitate emergency repairs of public infrastructure by government entities. The appropriate information, links, and contact information can be found on this slide of the PowerPoint. I know that they have revamped some things on their website to make this a little easier, and they're attempting to streamline the process, so hopefully that does come through. I also thought it was pretty great that they have actually given some of the names of the individual contacts, so you're not just calling a generic number, but the actual individual handling these issues. Moving on to slide 6. The use of ARP LFRF funding for offsetting COVID-19 revenue losses. So this must be applied toward the provision of government services, loss in revenue, and cannot exceed the amount of revenue actually lost. I'm just going to pause here for 1 second because I hear a lot of feedback. Does anybody else hear a lot of feedback? Okay. Judging by the nose, I'll just keep going. So I kind of want to, we're going to move on into just the ARP funding with this slide. It kind of just gives a little bit of, I think, a way of dovetailing how IDA and what some of the allowable uses of the ARP funding can allow for with the municipalities. So as far as the revenue losses, the funds can be used for losses of things like maintenance or pay-go funding, building of infrastructure like roads and sidewalks, environmental remediation, cybersecurity, public safety, public health or educational services. And I think what's telling here, especially after IDA, is that environmental remediation, sewer, things of that nature. I think some municipalities were hit extremely hard that never thought that they would experience flooding like they saw during IDA. And a lot of the allowable uses of the ARP funding is stormwater resiliency, water infrastructure, things of that nature. So this might be a great opportunity to utilize some of those things. I will caution, just remembering that the cost of providing these services must be incurred on or after March 3rd of 2021, that no LFRF funds can be used for principal and interest on debt service. So the feds have made that crystal clear. So moving on to the next slide. So here we really talk about the water, sewer, stormwater, broadband infrastructure projects. Those are not limited to COVID-19 revenue losses. So the feds want to make this crystal clear that since these types of projects are extremely important, that they're not going to limit what those losses could be. They want, you can use all your ARP money that you get for any of these eligible uses. So water and sewer projects that are eligible actually align with those for financial assistance through EPA's Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So that kind of streamlines the process a little bit, just to make it crystal clear that some of those projects, if you were contemplating them, are allowable. The types of projects that we've been told by the feds are certainly included are lead service line replacement, water and sewer mains, supply and treatment infrastructure, and stormwater remediation. Getting back to that stormwater remediation for Ida. So if we move on to slide 8, it talks about some of the period of performance and requirements that need to be met in using these funds. So the feds have said that the period of performance will run through December 31st of 2026. The real goal here is just to allow recipients a reasonable amount of time to complete the LFRF funded infrastructure projects. So the water, sewer, stormwater, or broadband construction projects can continue past the December 31st, 2024 deadline, assuming that the funds were obligated before that date. So that's the obligation date, and they can go until December 31st of 2026. So recipients can use the funds to cover costs incurred for eligible projects planned or started prior to March 3rd of 2021. However, those funds can only be utilized for the portions of the work that occur after March 3rd of 2021. So just a distinction that needs to be adhered to. The interim final rule encourages strong labor standards. We've seen that project labor agreements are now permitted for all prevailing wage public works projects over $5 million, excluding land acquisition costs. And if we move on to slide 9, I'm just going to highlight just how important the coordination and communication between the municipality and state, local, and nonprofit partners, how important that really is. It's crucial to ensuring non-duplication of benefits while also maximizing the importance of other outside assistance. This is especially important for IDA impacted communities concerning FEMA resources and other agencies outside organizations. So when contemplating certain uses of the ARP money, we're just advising everyone to assess whether the state already has a program by which to administer the LFRF funds for a specific purpose. So one example is DCA's Division of Housing and Community Resources. They're administering programs for rental, utility, and water assistance. So the state administration can ensure that the funds that you dedicate to these programs are expended on your residents and your residents only. There's also the Economic Development Authority Small Business Emergency Assistance Grants Program, which is something that you may be interested in. Some of the perks, I guess, to doing this is that Janelle Winter, who's the Director of Housing and Community Resources at DCA, has stood up these types of programs for years. They've stood it up for COVID-19. So any additional funds that you want to ensure are utilized for your municipality in particular, anything that's allocated over there, she can administer and make sure that the lottery run includes not just the state allocation, but also the allocation that you'd like to make sure goes to your residents only. It will not only help with the duplication of benefits, but it will also likely keep administrative costs down since that program is already up and running. Happy to kind of connect you if anybody's interested in doing that with Janelle, or you can just reach out directly to her division and she'll be happy to. I don't think that we can stress enough the importance of weighing how LFRF funds can achieve maximum longer-term impact while minimizing future unfunded legacy costs. So we're just asking that you think of sustainability. So use the funding for one-time expenditures such as infrastructure projects, attempt not to incur legacy costs by hiring new employees solely with this LFRF funding, that you'll be paying salaries and benefits for decades to come and eventually a pension. So it's one thing if these were hires that were necessary or contemplated before, but we caution against utilizing the ARP funds for the actual hiring of individuals, because we all know this will be 2 tranches of money that will dry up on or about 2024. Also asking that you look at options of allocating the LFRF funds towards providing government services. So that's freeing funds to offset sustained COVID-19 related revenue losses. So look at deploying funds toward improved stormwater infrastructure. We, the division, also strongly encourage multiple local units to collaborate in using their funds for capital or programmatic eligible uses as well. And then if we can move on to slide 10. So local governments intending to use LFRF funds for eligible projects should develop a realistic timeline for public bidding. Projects expected to exceed 12.5 million must be submitted to the Office of the State Comptroller for review at least 30 days prior to advertisement. So that's a timeline to keep in mind. Contracts valued at 2.5 million or more, but less than the 12.5 million mark, the local governments are required to notify OSC within 20 business days after making the award. And then we can move on to slide, I think we're on 11. So the Biden administration has been stressing the importance of racial and economic equity. We've seen with the ARP funding some unprecedented social allowable uses with the ARP funds. I don't think we've really ever seen that before. I know during Sandy, we saw lots of funding coming through the state for infrastructure, for housing, for buildings that were completely destroyed after Sandy. But here we not only have for infrastructure, but we have for things like mental health, in-home services. We've got premium pay. We have things for public safety response, for increases in violence seen after the pandemic, and substantial emphasis on projects promoting racial and economic equity. So we've seen outreach and access programs, geographic and demographic distribution allowed. It's certainly different than some things that we've seen with federal funding before. Now, the U.S. Treasury does strongly emphasize efforts to improve equity and solicit diverse input from underserved communities. A big component of this seems to be a delineation with the census tracts. So we have Dr. Chris Wheeler in our division working on that to kind of make sure that we can put a map out there so that every municipality can see where their census tracts fall and what that means for their ARP uses if they're contemplating some of these socially driven utilizations of the ARP funds. If we can move on to slide 12. So per the Treasury, the funds are to be grounded in the following 3 key principles. One is advancing equity must be a core part of management and policymaking processes. Successful equity work yields tangible changes positively impacting American lives. And then the third, equity benefits all Americans, not just some. So again, this really strong emphasis on social equity and what that means across the country. I think we're moving on to slide 13. So here we had where they actually define what they consider equity, which is the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment. As far as the underserved communities go and how they define that, we're looking at populations sharing a particular characteristic, as well as geographic communities. Again, systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life. So they've opined a little bit as to what that means. I know the Treasury has issued some guidance on that, and I think towards the end of the slides, we have some of those resources so that you can kind of delve into that. And then slide 14, I think, is actually the next one. And I think that is where we talk about some of the resources. So here, not just are the LFNs, the comptroller's guidance and what Treasury has put out thus far, but I also kind of want to just hone in on a couple of things. One is we know that right now there's that $2 trillion package percolating in DC. In there, they have job creations and infrastructure projects. And it's, again, an unprecedented amount of money that would be coming to the locals if that bill comes out of both houses, and the president has committed to signing it. We're being told that what's in there currently, which we've read, and that it will stay in there, is lead service line replacements. And there's supposedly enough funding in there to handle the entire country's lead service line replacements. If that is the case, I know that ARP, for example, also allows the usage of the funds to cover lead service line replacements. So what we're suggesting and strongly advocating for is that the municipalities, when evaluating what kind of projects they want to fund with their ARP money, is to have plans like A through E set up. And I would anticipate in those plans expecting to utilize more money than what the ARP money has been allowed for or given to your municipality. The reason being is that there appears to be some overlap in what those federal funds might look like. So we all know that these funds have to be allocated by the end of 2024, fully expended by the end of 2026. So it seems like a lot of time, but we know that that will move very quickly. So having certain plans in place will allow for us to be nimble. So if we get that additional federal funding coming, great. Then maybe that now can allow you to move forward with plan A using that pot of money. So now you can move over to plan B with the ARP money. And then perhaps there's also a spillover effect on that. So it's just something that we're suggesting the municipalities do, so that way they can quickly move on alternative plans if additional funding comes, so that they're not precluded by not utilizing all the ARP money by the expend by date. Also, a suggestion is simply to utilize us, right? So I have Jason here with me too, Jason Martucci, who many of you know well. He is not just our legislative liaison for the division, but also our chief regulatory officer. And he has been our ARP guru, following up on everything that's been coming out from Treasury as well as other state agencies to make sure that we are all speaking with one coherent voice. So any questions that you have, please reach out to us, even if it's strategizing on what the plans might look like or what others have been doing and how we can be helpful. And in tandem with that, we suggest discussing with your financial advisors, right? You've been talking to them and bond counsel about projects that you're looking to implement, how you're funding those with your CFOs, just kind of thinking through what those projects look like and what the ARP money can mean for getting those accomplished, because we all know that there are lots of projects we would like to do and don't always have the funds to do it. So that is the parting advice that I will give, and I will get off my soapbox there. I know that we had a couple of questions come through. I think I may have just missed reading them as I was going through the slides. So let me take a look.
Sure, and Jacqueline, Paul Penna on the league staff has been monitoring the chat as well, so he might be able to address some of the questions to you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mike, and yes, Director, thank you for this. The first question is, what about broadband, which is specifically broad? You know, does it include things like quote unquote smart benches, Wi-Fi installation, smart cans, shot spotter, point-to-point, access to municipal parks, street cameras, etc.?
So with things like shot spotter that are for like public safety and things of that nature, that does appear to be an allowable use under ARP. It falls under a slightly different category than just the broadband. It does seem to fall under the public safety usage. What I will say is, again, just caution about duplication of benefits. I know that perfect example is body cameras, and that is now a mandate, and that there are lots of grants out there through the AG's office as well as some federal ones. So just kind of imploring people again to make sure that we're utilizing all the resources that we have out there instead of some of the ARP money, which could be utilized for some really great infrastructure projects. But yes, things like that would be eligible under the ARP and broadband.
Great, thank you. The next question, also grants to communities, businesses and commercial enterprises, and lastly, stipend to essential workers. So those are multiple questions there. And I know that in some of our inquiries, we've gotten requests about other, municipality type funding in terms of libraries and other types of, quasi-governmental and community groups. So can you speak to grants to those entities? So
the municipalities can pass through some of their ARP money to third parties. That could be individuals, it could be nonprofits, it could be fire districts, it could be authorities. What I will say and what I will caution about has to do just with once you pass through the money, your obligation is not done. So the feds still keep the municipalities and the state, if we do any pass-throughs as well, on the hook for how those monies are expended. So it's still your obligation to make sure that they are utilized appropriately and within the parameters of the ARP guidance. Again, we focus on these underserved areas. So there's a lot of latitude there on especially any kind of access to social services, access to programs and even like libraries and things of that nature that may have been historically unavailable to those underserved areas. So there's a lot of latitude there. If there are like fact-specific inquiries, we are happy to entertain them if they want to talk to us offline about what their municipality is looking to stand up, and we can kind of walk through what that might look like.
Great, thank you. And stipends to essential employees.
So that is an allowable use, as we've all seen. What I just want to make sure everybody is aware of is just what the guidance actually requires there. So it's supposed to be for those employees who are making the least and were exposed the most, right? So they had the greatest risk of exposure during COVID-19 because by virtue of the work that they were doing. So some of the examples that the feds have given us are janitors, public health employees who are dealing with individuals, DPW workers, picking up garbage off the street, emptying out garbage cans, things of that nature. Those who had high risk of exposure from COVID-19. I believe they put a cap on of $13 per hour for premium pay, $25,000 max for each employee. They asked for you to kind of limit it to about, I think, 150% of the area median income. And if you were going to go above that, and I think you can either use like the county's max, or you can use the state's max, whichever was greater. But if you're going to go above that, you have to have specific justification for why you're giving it to employees who are above that threshold. So just all things to kind of keep in mind. Also really important to note, I've in a couple of the municipalities who did do this, there was some pushback from some of the unions about equity and how that was administered. So my suggestion would either be to make sure that it is completely based hourly by how frequently they were in the office and could be exposed. And if they're not going to do it that way, which seems to be a pretty equitable one across the board, that they would probably want to have a conversation with the unions to make sure they have their buy-in.
Great, thank you. Question from Randy. Is it permissible to use the funds to assist in moving a public safety building out of the flood zone? And while you're thinking about that, I'd encourage everyone on the call to, if you've got questions, to put them in the chat. We have a few more minutes here, so.
I might lean on Jason for this one. I'm not sure about the actual moving of a building out of a flood zone, because I think we're trying to combine their IDA and ARP, and I know there's some ways that we're attempting to do that. I don't know if that's a clear-cut one, so I think that's one that I might want to digest for a while, just to make sure that the answer I'm giving is accurate, because I don't want to lead anybody astray there, because I'm not sure that that is clear-cut under the ARP guidelines.
That's correct, Director. Jason Martucci speaking. Basically, this is where facts and circumstances matter. If we're just talking about moving a building, it takes you back to Superstorm Sandy. There could be various FEMA assistance available. It really depends on the scope of the project. It depends on. There might be certain ability to the certain extent. There's stormwater remediation, stormwater infrastructure involved, water, wastewater infrastructure involved. There might be some ability to use ARP funds in that respect, but just for, if you're allocating it just for a moving of the building or moving out of a building into a new space, that's where you're looking at probably more toward provision of government services, and you're really limited to what the revenue, COVID-19 related revenue loss is. So just really scrutinize the aspects of that project and see what, if any, what would fit in eligible use, and again, what other potential programs are out there, what other resources are out there to avoid a duplication of benefits.
Great, thank you very much, Jason.
Looks like a couple just came in, Paul, too.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. What about bulkheads and other hard armor structures along tidal water courses where there's ongoing erosion? Would that be a permissible use?
I think that that would fall under the stormwater and some of the resiliency that goes on there. I'd be curious, was that like a direct result of Ida? Or is that, again, some fact specifics, but, or is this just like a consistent problem that they have after any kind of rain? Or that they see, I know like certain inner cities, we have an issue where after rainstorms, they have significant flooding in certain areas, which then contaminates their water with their sewage. So that would certainly be permissible use, but I'd want to gather a little more facts on that one.
That sounds
Consistent
fair.
problem with ongoing erosion.
Yeah, and it's they did say consistent problem with ongoing erosion that just came in. So it sounds like J-Law should reach out to Jason in your department to share the specific facts and develop an appropriate plan if it works. So next we have, can we use ARP monies to purchase a building in order to expand our health department?
So I think that there are certainly ways to accomplish that, especially depending on where the health department is located in the municipality and the population makeup. Again, I think that goes back to a lot of what the Biden administration is trying to hone in on, access, equity, social justice. So that is certainly something that we can talk through with them because I think we could probably get there.
Sounds good. So it looks, let me scroll through. I think that we are mostly up to, here we go. Here's a new one from Linda. Are there concerns using ARP funds for projects that may also be funded in part through iBank or other federal or state funding?
So Jason could correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe you cannot use the money for matching. Like, so if like the feds gave you something and they wanted like a certain match, then that might not be allowable. However, if it's iBank and it hasn't actually been allocated yet, so let me be clear on that. So since this is supposed to be for March 3rd, 2021 and on, if this is for a project that was started before then, it could still be utilized if not all of the project has been paid for yet and is still ongoing, right? So if part of the project's still ongoing, that portion can be utilized. If with iBank or DEP funds, if they decide, let's say they're going to give them like a low interest loan or something along those lines, they made it clear that it can't be used for principal and interest on debt payments. So if that hasn't been finalized yet and they want to either walk back some of it or maybe just get a portion of it and use some of their ARP money to cover a portion of the project, I think that that would be permissible. But again, it all comes down to the time frame and if they're already on the hook for any of those costs with principal and interest payments. So I think it's, again, important to kind of walk through all the facts that's around that circumstance.
Great, thank you. Next question.
I'm sorry. Yes, it potentially could be. There are actually, as far as matching goes, state matches are not prohibited under the program. Certain federal matches are, but only if that specific program prohibits the match. So the rules related to matching are actually pretty liberalized. Another aspect of this program, which perhaps a little bit different than other federal programs we're maybe used to dealing with. But again, just to go to the director's point earlier, duplication of benefits, that's something that absolutely has to be taken into consideration. Effective coordination, and this is where we're talking about plans A, B, C, D, and E. We're looking at capital stacks and combination of funds. That it really needs to be planned out. And to the extent you have a more complex project, and even in this case of a, probably some of the effective, this particular case is effective program delivery, but any type of complex project, it may be advisable to obtain a grant consultant or an integrity monitor, third party, and reasonable administrative costs are permitted under ARP LFRF program. So it's not like you're out on the hook for any administrative costs or compliance-related costs. Costs related to single audit, as usually the case with other federal programs, are permissible, again, assuming they're reasonable.
Thank you, Jason. And actually, one of the questions we've gotten a fair amount of that I'd like to echo is also the hiring of grant consultants is a permissible use under these funds. So you don't have to use separate local funds for this. So next question we have is, can you use ARP funds to construct a new water tower?
So before I jump into that, I just want to piggyback off something you said, Paul. So not only is grants, so grant writer, yes, but also auditors. So if you wanted to get somebody in or a consultant in early on to make sure that what you're doing with your ARP funds meets all the criteria, that is allowable under the ARP fund. So you can utilize that instead of your own funds to hire one of those auditors or consultants. So just an important note to me because we all remember Sandy.
Great, thank you very much. So next question, as I just mentioned, was can you use the ARP funds to construct a new water tower?
Jason, do we look into that yet? I know water mains are completely allowable, sewer mains are completely allowable. Infrastructure is allowable, so I don't really see why that would be prohibited.
Yeah,
but I will talk about Jason.
Yeah, I haven't heard that specific one. To the extent it's by and large tracks with the EPA's Clean Water Revolving Fund program. So to the it doesn't mean it's necessarily prohibited as a water infrastructure. But I would double check in terms of the EPA. But generally speaking, water infrastructure is a permitted use. And if we're talking about water tower, I'm assuming you're having to do has to do with a well, has to do with water pressure. There could be other potential issues dealing with water quality and water delivery. That even to the extent they're not precisely on point with the Clean Water Revolving Fund provides assistance for, there are potentially other eligible uses of which to group that in. And again, just keep in mind that there are other potential, to the extent there are other potential grant resources out there from other programs that are being utilized, that will also be taken into account to assess the total.
Great, thank you very much, Jason. So Mike, it looks like we are caught up on questions, and I'd encourage everyone, if you still do have a question or a thought, put it in the chat in the last few minutes we have together. So, but scrolling through, we are up to speed right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. And before I wrap this up, my thanks to Jacquelyn, to Jason, Shire, and really the staff at DLGS for working with us to put this together. We're coming in at about 45 minutes. So the division, as always, is efficient and effective in delivering the message. We are, as I mentioned earlier, this is being recorded. So we will be posting it on our website. There's an editing process, and so it may take a day or two, but it will be up. The PowerPoint will make available. And of course, the league and the division are always here as a resource. If I can do a quick commercial, many of these topics are also going to be covered at the league conference in November. Yes, there's a conference this year, and yes, it's going to be in person. I know, Jacquelyn, there's going to be a DLGS update on Tuesday afternoon of the conference week. One of the resources you pointed to is the Office of the State Controller. They have a session Thursday afternoon as well, and issues related to ARP funding, infrastructure funding, federal legislative issues, and what's coming down the pike from Washington are going to be throughout the week. So again, it's a great resource. The league is here. The DLGS is always here. I see no other questions, so I think we'll wrap it up. And thank you all for joining us. Keep an eye out. We're rolling out a lot of these free Friday afternoon, Friday lunchtime informational briefings. So we've done some already. We're going to be doing some more. So keep an eye out. And I would just say have a great weekend. Stay well, stay healthy, and hopefully see you in Atlantic City. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike.